Sich selbst sein.
equals to be oneself.
Excerpt by Billy on February the 5th, 1980.
Translation by Christian Frehner. Prepared for the public lecture held by Christian Frehner at the Toronto Public Library, Lillian Smith Branch, September the 9th, 2018.
A great many human beings are not themselves, because they are making the thoughts, feelings and doings of others their own, whereby they get addicted to anger, joylessness, hatred, grief and sorrow and so on. In general, human beings don't understand that when they are pestered with bad words and actions by others, they absorb these and make them their own, whereby they are not themselves anymore, but become a copy of those who inflict harm or damage in any form to them. But exactly to refrain of becoming a copy must occur, because, fundamentally, the thoughts, feelings and doings of those with an ill will regarding harm, evil and damage are not the business of those who are exposed to the attacks. On the contrary, these are the sole business of those with the ill will, the antagonists and self-appointed enemies, etc. And since everything is the business of the opponents, it is urgent that the thoughts, feelings, words and doings, etc., which are created by the opponents, are not absorbed and not made one's own, as it very often is the case, unfortunately, by which the human beings are not themselves anymore, but are becoming a copy of those who are provoking disturbance and peace, hatred and defamation, etc., in order to not let such worthlessness come near to oneself, and to not indulge in anger, grief, sorrows and hatred, etc., there remains just one possibility for the attacked human beings, namely to direct one's own thoughts and feelings in such way as not taking serious the attacks by the antagonists, and to remain clear and to say to oneself again and again that the thoughts, feelings, the hatred, the hostility, the evil words and the defamations and machinations, etc., are solely the issue of the opponents, but not one's own. This means, therefore, all attacks and problems of any kind of those who are hostile to me are not my problems, but simply and solely their business, through which they harm themselves, and with which they have to cope themselves. Attacks by others, be it through thoughts and feelings, through words, hatred, defamations or action, may never be made one's own business, because, fundamentally, these belong to the initiators, who have to cope with it themselves. Through their attacks against their fellow human beings, they inflict damage to themselves, because their machinations impair their own thoughts and feelings, whereby they are without peace and joy within themselves and fall prey to evil frustration. In general, attacks and problems of other persons must be ignored and must be parried in such a wise that the attacks and problems of the opponents are not those of the own person. Only through this reasonable insight, as well as this manner of thinking, feeling and acting, can human beings protect themselves against the attacks, lies, accusations, hatred and defamations, etc., of others, because, actually, all evil and problems of such kind do not belong to one's own person, but belong to the attackers and adversaries.
The attacks and problems of the others are not my business, but those of the male and female attackers,
must be the constant slogan for those who are attacked, who are pestered by words, thoughts, feelings, lies, problems, defamations and actions, etc. And only when the thoughts, feelings and modes of behaviour are fostered in such a form are the human beings able to free themselves from being a copy of the opponents and to truly be themselves. If human beings want to be themselves, they may not practice hostility, and not so even against one's most evil enemies and opponents. If, firstly, the attacks and problems, etc., of the opponents are not considered as one's own business and are rejected back to the attackers, then it is required to oppose the adversaries in a peaceful wise. This has to occur in such a wise as to respond friendly, lovingly and peacefully, and also, frequently and at possibly daily opportunities, to send them thought and feeling-based loving and good wishes. This safeguards, on the one hand, against building up hostility oneself, and, on the other hand, there results a valuable self-protection which safeguards the development of one's own evil thoughts and feelings, and, resulting from these, malice, hatred or even needs for revenge, etc. All this affects that generally everything has a beneficial effect on one's own personality and one's own character, and, through this, an entirely neutral, positive, balanced attitude is built up. As the human being thinks, so he or she lives, and as the human being lives, so he or she thinks, and what the human being thinks, so he or she is. This very ancient wisdom finds itself being confirmed in the human being's world of thoughts and feelings and in his or her actions. And when human beings truly and consciously endeavour to see their self-appointed enemies and opponents, etc., only as human beings, and not as enemies and opponents, and if they don't make their attacks and problems their own, but reject these to the originators, and at the same time cultivating loving and peaceful thoughts towards them, then all hostility is fading. As a result, at the end of life, only dear fellow human beings remain, but never enemies.